My name is Kycell, and I am now staring at the aftermath of the attack on Mindas Castle, having failed my role in the plan and not knowing what to do next. The hissing cry of Lord Natanus Carnager, half-elven, pierced the air all around us, and likely breaching the library's walls to be heard echoing through the entire castle grounds. The wooden chair leg jutting from his chest, and the enormous Fouchard polearm through his lower stomach. His body began to seemingly drain of all fluid as his skin became even more pallid and his joints far more vascular. As he reached out with clawed fingers that grew more grim and gnarled by the second. Ahani, Valoigne, Oxor, and myself stood in terrified silence as my former employer and pseudo-ally was rendered a thoroughly dehydrated corpse. Valoigne was the first to move, crossing the library floor to Carnager, inspecting the vampire lord, turning to me as he wrenched his spear from the body, a look of both calm and violent annoyance across his face.
I thought the plan was for you to keep him here. He nearly killed my captain. She barely escaped with her life, Kycell.
I panicked and began to profusely apologize, but Ahani moved between us and harshly reminded Valoigne that the prisoner Oxor still needed to leave, and we had to meet up with Myrick back at the university. Clipping his weapon onto his back, Valoigne finally turned from me, his scowl still deeply etched into his brow. He began to tend to the rotund mouseling Oxor, who was still tangled in the set of desks Carnager had flung him into. I turned to Ahani and began to apologize to her as well, both for failing to keep Carnager in the library, but in fact sending him to retrieve her specifically, which should have not only been done days ago, but also put her and everyone else's lives in danger. She shook her head and forgivingly patted me on the back, reminding me that we really needed to get out of this castle. Just as I was about to agree, around a shelf of books scurried Chinook, my draconid co-worker, frantically waving several bags of blood above his head.
Count Carnager, I have the blood you asked for. No need to drain Mirabai Sally. Huh?
He stopped in his tracks and gawked at the desecrated remains of Carnager, then back at me, and finally at Lieutenant Valoigne, and began to shout for help. Valoigne quickly closed the distance between them and tackled the tiny, dragon-like humanoid scholar to the floor of the library. Whether it was from fear or head trauma as a result of the attack, Chinook was rendered unconscious immediately. Valoigne looked as if he was about to remove his spear again, but I shouted that he was an innocent. Valoigne looked at me with a condescendingly sarcastic grimace. I pleaded with him again, and he stood up from the pinned young draconid, removing a line of rope from his waist that had a clawed hook on the end. He began to tie Chinook's hands and feet together. Ripping a swath of cloth from Carnager's robes, he also bound Chinook's mouth shut.
Well, he's seen too much. We'll have to take him with us for now, and leave him once we clear the kingdom with Oxor in tow. Come, everyone. Galen should have spare rope, and Eliseo should be heading to the university with your friend as of now.
Ahani longingly looked around the library before making her way to the door. Aksur was heaping praise and thanks upon everyone in our group, but mostly Valoigne, who'd done most of the heavy lifting, not just figuratively, but also as he hefted Chinook over his back. And they also left the library. I was the last to leave, eyeing the desecrated Nitanus and the bags of blood now spilt and pooling across the library floor. It was selfish, but I prayed they didn't destroy any of the ancient tomes I spent the better part of my time in this book room trying to save. With one last look around, including a lingering glance at the dimension door I had collected my new spell scrolls from, and where Chinook had collected the blood, mildly surprised it was still functioning despite Carnager's state, I left the Mindas library for good, much to my own regret. Outside in the courtyard, I saw a handful of Morongo knights milling about, along with the unnerving sight of the skeletal warriors Merkind had lent to Valoigne for this operation. With a sharp whistle from Valoigne, a number of grappling hooks flung over the outer walls. Soldiers stepped aside and allowed the skeletons to cross first. I was later told it was due to the fact that they were much lighter and near completely unequipped with gear, aside from some makeshift clubs and blades. There was also the fact that if the castle was surrounded by the enemy, they would be the first to engage. As our group approached, a rather severely wounded and sickly pale-skinned female knight came to Valoigne. She saluted him with her uninjured arm, but then quickly used said arm to clutch the back of a wounded leg. Ahani rushed forward to help her prepare to climb, and Aksur ran to her as well, once again heaping praise and apologies. It seemed I'd missed quite a bit as I put everyone in jeopardy. I silently scaled the wall after the last of the soldiers crossed, and just before Valoigne and the injured pallid knight, who I learned was Captain Galain that Valoigne had mentioned. As I reached the top of the wall, I saw the blasted remains of the dungeon tower I'd used to enter this courtyard for the past week or so. Truly, this attack was immense, and I hoped for Myrink's safety, while also fearing the retribution the Rajalassans would no doubt have planned in retaliation. On the other side of the wall, we regrouped and began our march back to the Palamedes University to plot the night's extraction and where my scholarly party would head next. We traveled the outskirts of town, but from what we could see, the entirety of Goldenrod seemed to have fled in the direction of the castle front. Stores, houses, everything, they were all deathly quiet, and we hadn't seen a single half-orc guard or ogre mercenary. We finally reached the university entrance. Most of the students had likely joined the townsfolk in Gawking, leaving our platoon to enter unsighted. As we entered, a single knight approached Valoigne and informed him that Aksur's wife was safe, much to my and Ahani's surprise. Had Myrink flaked as well? Valoigne informed us he was to return to their designated headquarters on campus, and he was leaving Ahani and myself to check in with Merkind and the rest. I asked what he planned to do with Chinook. He offered a smirk, tousling his lengthy hair, and assured me that they had a pin for the scholar for the time being. Trusting Valoigne was a man of his word, we left to go find Kind and Myrink. Racing through the same porcelain white halls and student exam rooms, we finally returned to Kyne's private quarters. We were immediately greeted by the sounds of happy little calf hooves running in circles, and the relieved laughter of Kind as we entered the room. The mayor was actually standing from his bed, an enormous patient's gown draped over him, while the woven pate of Nurse Estelise grimaced and barked for him not to move so much. The gang was nearly all here. Kind was cradling his son, Court. The elven babysitter Perna exhaustingly slumped in a chair in the corner, Estelise taking Perna's temperatures, and Saika, the Lamian doctor in training, nearly leapt her entire serpentine frame into Ahani and myself.
I am so glad that you two have made it back. Is my ring with you too?
Confused, I turned to Perna and asked why my ring didn't arrive with her. Slightly more alert than before, she told us how Myrink had taken out a large number of guards and rescued Court, Soiree, and herself. But when a huge half-orc captain with a pair of ogres for backup had arrived, she stayed back to fight them while everyone else fled. Perna had assumed she would have arrived with our second party. I sensed a deep dread fill me for what felt like the millionth time this year. Had she been captured, or was she still making her way here? Ahani seemed even more exacerbated by this news than I was. I assured her that Myrink was a highly capable gunslinger, and there wasn't a chance that she'd been taken down by the likes of the Rajal Assad or Pagas forces. Kind put down baby Court onto the floor, and the little calf began to laugh and run once again. The mayor gingerly touched his recently reattached horn and gently tapped at his chest and arm scars. This speedy recovery was nothing short of miraculous. If I hadn't known better, I'd think he was nearly back in fighting shape.
I'm sure she's fine. That woman has more fight in her than a dozen Oni samurai versus a 9-headed rattler hydra. What we need to focus on is getting out of town before those bastards head down to this here university looking for revenge.
He began to lay out his plan once again. He and baby Court would hop the nearest carriage out of Goldenrod and lay low in this new settlement up north he recently heard about. Perna was free to return to her house and inform her folks about her situation, and leave the option to flee in their hands. I told them I had to remain in town for the time being, to regroup with Myrink, then likely head to Scalamandri port. The Ragazi Raspo supposedly had more intel on Krunturg. That was if they could ever truly be trusted. And if that didn't pan out, I would follow Kind. Ahani agreed, so long as we assured Myrink's safety as soon as possible.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi, along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.